Okay, we are officially live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our queer poetry panel. Thank you for joining us today as we explore the power of poetry, its craft, its voice, and its role in the world as a tool for us, as tool for creative expression and the exploration, as well as representation of identity. My name is Hassan, and I'll be your moderator for this session. And we're honored here to be joined by our three finalists, Saúl, Tanya, and Cass. We'll hear from each one of the panels today. They'll be giving us a reading from their poetry. We'll be hearing a discussion about queer poetry, the state of queer poetry, past, present, and the future ahead for queer poetry. How is it representing our identities, and how is it being a medium for creative expression? All right, I'm going to give the mic to our panelists today to introduce themselves. Let's start with Saúl.
Hi, y'all. My name is Saúl, and I am a queer poet. I am currently residing in Texas, Central Texas, specifically San Antonio. I am born and raised here, and I just moved back maybe a couple years ago. And I'm here as a finalist for my debut collection, How to Kill a Goat and Other Monsters.
Amazing. Thank you, Saúl. All right, who do we have next?
I can go if you'd like. I'm Tanya Olson. I'm a poet and I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm here as a finalist in lesbian poetry for my book, Born Backwards.
Amazing. Welcome, Tanya.
And I'm Cass Donish. I live in Columbia, Missouri. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary poet, and I'm here as a finalist in LGBTQ plus poetry for my book, Your Dazzling Death. I'm originally from California, but yeah, right now living in Columbia, Missouri.
Amazing. Welcome, Cass. Incredible. We have our panelists. I think the three of you are being modest a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit about you, introduce you formally, and read your bios. So we have Saúl Hernández, is a queer writer from San Antonio, Texas, who was raised by former undocumented parents. Saúl has an MFA in creative writing from the University of Texas at El Paso. His debut poetry collection, How to Kill a Goat and Other Monsters, is the 2025 Texas League of Writers Discovery Award winner and our finalist for the category of gay poetry. He was longlisted for a 2025 Penn Open Book Award. Saúl is the recipient of the 2025 fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. And then we have Tanya Olson. Tanya Olson lives, and you mentioned you live in Silver Spring, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, Silver Spring, Maryland. First book, Boyish, was published by Yes Yes Books in 2013 and received a 2014 American Book Award. Her second book, Stay, was released by Yes Yes Books in 2019. In 2010, she won a Discovery Boston Review Prize, and she was named a 2011 Lambda Fellow by the Lambda Literary Foundation. Great to have you here. And we have Cass Donish. Cass is a queer poet, an interdisciplinary writer, educator, and performer. They were born and raised in Greater Los Angeles. Their most recent poetry collection, Your Dazzling Death, won the Publishing Triangle's Audre Lorde Award and is currently a finalist for the Lambda Award, where we are. And yeah, great to have you all. All right, so just a little bit, a brief outline of what to expect. So we have for about 45 minutes together. We'll begin with the discussion, guided with questions that we have, about 4 to 5 questions, if time allows. Then we'll enjoy short readings by our panelists from each of the panelists and finalists. We'll open the floor for questions at the end before we wrap up. So are we ready to dive in? Amazing. Let's start with our first question. So thinking about questions, reading your work, I wanted to categorize our questions based on different, let's say, genres of questions. We want to tackle the political questions. We want to tackle craft questions, identity questions, community questions, and cover as much as we can. All right. The first question, though, the reading your work, the first question that came to mind is, how does queerness shape your poetic voice, or the forms you choose?
I can start. One way that I think about queerness is as hybridity, non-normativity, of course, and really thinking about it as change. And so I think in my poetry, sometimes when things become, the more fragmented and the more hybrid things become, like incorporating other texts or kind of floating between prose and lineated poems, or kind of mixing representational with non-representational language. Those are all ways that I feel like I'm trying to access the parts of myself that are embodied in a queer way. So I think of queerness as the body, and the poem as a body too. The poem has to incorporate some kind of hybridity that reflects our bodies and ourselves.
I love that. I love that. You're tackling exploration of how can the form inform the content in a way.
Mm.
I love that. Anyone
Yes.
else?
Yeah, I can go next. Where should I start? Let's see, when I was 5. No, without going too much into like the past of my life, I feel like identity really first began shaping my life as so much for me to be so many things before the age of 20. And when I started writing and learning craft, I started exploring more so what could I do beyond the white page itself. How can I manipulate language or the surroundings around to ask for more? And there's this famous quote by Ocean Vuong who says something along, I might butcher it, but it says something along the lines of, we often see queerness as deprivation, but to them, queerness asks for more, and it asks, like, is this enough? And it asks for innovation. So when I was kind of creating the final forms for my book, I was asking myself the same question. If my life has asked so much of me in identity-wise, what can I ask of these poems? And how can these poems translate kind of very carefully kind of my own lived experiences into the page with that same tension, with that same risk, with that same vulnerability. So for me, that's how I kind of came to these forms, by asking, is this enough for me on the page?
Yeah, I would kind of agree with Saúl about that like, I think queerness means that you're living outside norms, and oftentimes that you're living outside of laws, and that you're being told that, what you do or the way you're doing it is wrong. And so just inherently that really kind of makes you look at those norms and rules, and if you are going to believe that you're not necessarily wrong, then you have to kind of question those ideas, and think about what you want your relationship to be with them. And so I do think that, and it doesn't have to, but I certainly think that can then shape, if you're a queer artist, a queer writer, how you relate with those expectations, and that can be a very freeing thing, even though it may be personally difficult. It can be a very freeing thing as an artist.
I love that. I love that. All of your answers are making me think of a follow-up question that I just can't move forward without asking. A question, the idea of a question being the driving force behind the narrative of a poem, whether it's a question of identity, question of the bounds of queer life, and what does it mean to be queer. Would you agree that a question is usually the driving force of a narrative in your poem, the reason why you attacked or approached the page in the first place?
I would say so. I would say, me personally as a writer, like I, am driven by questions, and I think a part of my big work or exploration in any type of writing I do is trying to achieve an answer to that question, which you may know as writers, we never reach the answer. We just end up kind of with more questions, and therefore, before you know it, you have a manuscript.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Go ahead, Cass.
I was just gonna say thanks. I definitely start with some kind of a feeling of a question or uncertainty, and sometimes I really liked, Saul, hearing you say that you're kind of looking for an answer. I'm sometimes trying to go further away from an answer and find on the page a way to dwell in uncertainty, and kind of using art as a way to try to develop a better relationship with uncertainty, because we're living with so much uncertainty, anxiety, fear all the time. So I think for me, it's a space to try to make peace with that and kind of be in relation to it more, and try to get away from the part of my mind that is seeking answers. So I think that's part of what I'm trying to do in the poems.
Yeah, when you first asked that, I sort of thought like, well, no, I don't think I have a question. Like I have something I want to do or achieve or with that. But I think in hearing Saúl and Cass's answer, it is kind of a question, right? For me with this book, I was trying to think about how to fit into a queer lineage, trying to think about what books had done for me as a queer writer, and wanting to do that same thing for future generations, things that people that were coming up in the future. And I guess that doesn't sound like a question, but it is a question, right? Like, how do you do that? What did it do for you? How do you do that now for other people? So I am going to agree that it starts with a question now.
Yeah. I have actually one more small comment that I feel like I should have said, which is in my collection, that's the nominated collection, I actually have 4 poems in this collection that are called The Question of Surviving This. And the very first question in the book is one of the poems with that title, and so is the very last poem. So it begins with the question of survival, and it ends with the question of survival. And it's like the entire thing is just staying within that question. My book is about my experience of suicide loss, and so it's about the question of surviving suicide loss, and just it never gets answered, but it's how do we live inside that?
I love that. I love that. I think poetry uniquely is the place to face a lot of the answers. I'm thinking of my study with the art of the personal essay, and how that is, you have the option of whether to face the self or run away from the self. But when it comes to poetry, there is always the question of facing the questions about one's life, one's identity. Amazing, amazing. All right, let's move on to our next question. I was thinking, do you see your poetry as political by nature, or being queer, or or does politics enter more deliberately? Who would like to go first?
I can kind of start up the conversation, perhaps. I think I see mine as both. I think about this a lot, but simply like when I'm writing from a queer perspective or centering queer bodies, voices, or even yearning, I'm already challenging those dominant narratives that exist, with writing this. And this itself becomes a political act for me. However, at the same time, I'm also very intentional about what I weave into politics with my work. And this can either be seen through like themes of resistance, survival, critique, or other types of systematic violence. For me, kind of the personal and political are inseparable when it comes to my writing. Even when I'm writing about intimacy, family, or memory, the larger structures that shape those experiences, politics are always kind of present with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I feel like queerness doesn't make anything inherently political, because there's a lot of acceptable queerness now, for good or bad reasons. That's where we are, right? But there's a lot of acceptable queer identities and positions there. So I don't think that like writing queer content is inherently political. It probably depends what queer content you're writing. But I feel like, to me, like the political strength of poetry is the fact that it's not tied to facts or real worlds or any of those things. It has the ability to imagine new worlds, new norms, new ideas, and present those. And that isn't, I think, necessarily tied to queerness either, but it is, and it's not necessarily tied to all poetry either, right? But it is something that lies inside of queerness as a possibility, and it's something that lies inside of poetry as a possibility. But I don't think is, at this point at least, I don't think is inherent to either one of them. It doesn't feel very inherent.
I think this is a really interesting question for us as queer folks to try to talk about, because you can be writing about something that's incredibly intimate and private and personal, but our culture does politicize our voices and our existence. And so for me, the book that I have written is kind of a strange mix of that, because I was writing about something so private and personal, which was the loss of my partner to suicide. And this is my life. This is not something I ever wanted to live through, not something I ever wanted to write a book about. but it was my personal experience that was happening in my life. And so the expression of grief and the expression of love through the poems was something that I had to do to survive, and that was just completely about me. But as I wrote the book, it was like, this is also not only my story, but in a way a story that can touch other folks in the community, in our community. So writing about queer grief and writing about queer loss feels deeply personal and deeply political at once. There's only a few poems in the book that I would say maybe, like there is actually one poem where I mention, the actual phrase comes up of anti-trans legislation. But overall, the poems are a lot more about, my grief rituals and my memories and intimacy, and just the kind of acute grief that I was in. So yeah, it almost feels like it's a question of, in what context are we sharing the poems? In what context are we reading the work? Sometimes it feels like in a queer space, it feels like I'm connecting personally with others, but in a space that's not as queer, suddenly it does feel really political, or people are viewing it as a political statement that I'm sharing. And it's a little bit more of a spectacle almost too. So I think it's such a complicated issue and very, very difficult to parse. But when you're in a community whose existence is politicized, then that becomes part of the work, for better or for worse. And then, you know, we can embrace that and do what we can with it. But it's still our stories, and those stories belong to us. So I think that's important to remember for our own sense of empowerment and agency too, is that these stories are ours.
I love that. I love that. And I think you touch on an important distinction between whether a queer poetry is, or queer expression in general, political or has been politicized. It is a distinction that we can go have a whole panel just talking about that topic. All right, I would love to hear, you mentioned queer spaces and how we feel in those queer spaces. Makes me think of community. What role does community play in your writing and in publishing in general for you? Who would like to go first?
I could go first on this one if you want. I'm a pretty regular member of writing groups. I've been a member of both a specifically queer writing group, the Arts Club of Washington here in DC started a residency for queer writers, and I took part in that one year. And then my little cohort stuck together as a writing group, and I still am in that writing group, and that's been good. I've also been a member of a writing group that was not queer oriented, and both of them felt really important, like a community to me. But I do feel like they kind of serve the communities that they serve differently. The queer writing group does seem to also kind of serve the queer community in differing ways with that. And I guess I feel like it's important to be a really good literary citizen and, support readings and series and presses that are doing that work. And I think that's true in general, but I do feel maybe a little stronger pull or a little more importance if that if that organization has a queer connection or a pretty explicit queer, because I feel like I feel like queer poetry does a lot of important work passing on information across queer generations, and so in order for that to happen, we have to keep those things going. So
I love that. I love that. Anyone would like to add or answer to the question? All right.
Yeah, I think space is very important. I grew up in a community where everything was very religious. Kind of to accept anyone from the outside, like an outsider, was kind of a no-no. So for me, venturing off in my 20s, to find community was very safe and also very rewarding at the end, because you learn about chosen family and who you want to be your family at the end of the day. And I feel like these literary spaces are very important too, in the same way, because sometimes other spaces don't see you fully, or see you as who you are. And that's why I'm very grateful for Lambda, because it did offer that space. When I did Lambda last year for nonfiction, I presented work, and I got the feedback that I kind of wanted to hear, and that again, going back to like the perspective of writing from a queer perspective, I feel like that was very valuable for me in taking the feedback that I received. And, you know, sometimes we're not all lucky to have a space where you're seen, and I think that's very important. So for anyone out there who, you know, is searching for community, please find it. It will literally be like life-changing. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, I agree that community is so important, and there's kind of in-person community, and there's online community, and then there's also kind of the community of voices that you're writing with, and you know, the lineages that we have that we carry with us, and I think they're all really important. I'm currently in the process of opening an art space in the little downtown here in Columbia, which is a college town. And it's going to be a space of solidarity between queer and trans groups and BIPOC folks. And we're actually going to be doing some different readings, and there's a small gallery too. So it's for visual art artists and writers. And there's going to be a couple of us leading independent creative writing classes. And we're also going to be, each of our events that we do a reading is going to be raising fundraising for a local organization or for another social justice organization. So it's just starting. We haven't even had our first event yet. Our first event is later this month, but it's been really rewarding thinking about solidarity between the queer and trans community and other communities, and how we can, as writers, do collaborations with other artists in other genres and also with other communities that are under attack right now, and how we can just really be present with each other and be doing work together. And I won't go into this too much, but one other thing that I like to think about as kind of part of community in terms of writing is, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but intertextuality. I like kind of thinking of my writing sometimes as including other voices, and then quoting and including other voices on the page, or doing projects that are kind of in dialogue with something else, feels like a way of acknowledging that even if we are kind of writing as just only one person and our name is attached to our publications, that there are ways to acknowledge that we are never writing alone. We are all, as individuals, kind of part of a collective too.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Cass, we need to schedule outside of this. I would love to hear more about your work around intertextuality specifically. My MFA thesis was about intertextuality and the art of reimagining, but I digress. And also, congratulations in advance on the queer space that you're launching. We would love a link, a shout out. We're happy to spread the word, share on social media, and help you out.
Yeah, is there a chat? There's like a chat that's shared with everybody, right?
Correct.
It's called Nightjar Arts Collective. And I just put the link in. I think folks viewing the panel can see our chat. Is that right?
Yes, correct. And
okay. So yeah, it's Nightjar Arts Collective.
There it is. Amazing, thank you. And before, just on the topic of community so far, I think, Saúl, you bring up a great point of what we're doing right now. This is the Lambda is community. When I ask the question, is not this far away place that you might go to, or we are doing it right now. This is a queer community, and it's easy to get lost in the formality of an award ceremony, but I am really thankful for the space that Lambda created for us to be here and discuss your incredible, amazing work. All right. Another question about community. How do you navigate the tension between writing for yourself versus writing for an imagined queer community? do you keep the audience in mind when expressing? I think you've touched on the answer a little bit, Cass. You were processing a lot of grief through those poems. But when it comes to, my reader, who's my reader, the idea of writing towards someone, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's sometimes complicated. Sometimes I feel like it's hard to find the voice of a specific poem until the voice has like a direction of someone that it's going towards. I like writing to people. In the case of my book, a lot of the poems were written to my partner who had passed. So there's often a you in the poems, and it's her. And but other times it's to other people in my life, to my current partner, or to a community, I guess. But it's not always like that. Sometimes it's to ourselves. But I think sometimes it's tricky finding the voice and feeling of a poem. And maybe sometimes it's hard to say who it's for. Like there's not exactly a name for it, but at least for me, sometimes it's like I can't find the footing of the poem without having a feeling of like the directionality of the language.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I always kind of have to really early on in a poem figure out like who is this poem talking to. And like Cass, I would agree. It's not always. Sometimes it is just almost like an interior voice, right? And it might be someone else's interior voice. But I do think that's always a really important question. That kind of who is the intended audience for this poem? Who is this poem talking to? And that may be very different and should be probably really very different from its actual audience. But in a good poem, right, the actual audience, the people who are actually reading the poem can know that intended audience, can figure it out. And that's part of a really positive reading experience, right? When you're reading poems, when you feel talked to, or you can understand, you can step into the intended audience's shoes and kind of hear that poem. So I think as a writer and a reader, that's a really important thing that I'm always thinking about.
I think for me, it's very different when it comes to addressing if I'm writing for an audience or not. To me, going back to that question of, or maybe, yeah, the question, if we write with an intended question to begin with, to me, I always begin with that, mostly just because, for me, even writing about lineage is difficult because I don't know anybody past like my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if, whether I had queer ancestors or didn't. So because of this, I feel like when I am writing my poems, I'm not writing to an audience. I'm mostly just writing, to kind of be surrounded by whatever my research or whatever comes out of the question I'm trying to answer. I would say I work kind of like an archaeologist. I'm putting pieces from the past, the present, maybe even in the future together. And then I'm kind of gluing all these pieces to see what they become at the end. And that's pretty much like my writing style. At the end of the day, whether the poem, addresses a certain type of audience, I don't come into that with the beginning, I feel like. It's until the end when I'm like, wow, like this came out of a question. Who is it addressing? And does it belong with this current work or project that I'm doing, or is this a voice that is separate or wants to be its own project?
I love that. I love that you're ending your answer with multiple questions, because that is a discussion on its own. I'm thinking specifically of how can intersectionality, and you mentioned your lineage, your ancestors, how can intersectionality complicate the idea of writing for an audience or writing in a tone that might be targeted towards this part of who I am or this part of who I am. Incredible. What an incredible discussion. I think we have to wrap up the discussion segment here to move towards hearing all of your wonderful poetry and giving us a brief synopsis on your book. So, all right, so let's move to, all right, we have about, so at the time, yeah, we have 10 minutes. Whoever would like to start reading. Any volunteers?
I can go ahead and kick it off.
Amazing.
I'm going to read a poem in the last section of my book, and this is titled, "This Is How I Fight." I learned how to kiss a man easy when he held a gun to my neck. I pulled a thread off my shirt and watched the end become a beginning. At school, I was taught how to hide from a storm, never how to stop one. When I was a child, I collected fireflies every night. For years, I ate them, hoping one day my insides could hold light. My therapist asked me today, "Have you forgiven?" To survive sometimes means to incinerate history. Like when Abuelo died, Abuela gathered every single photo from her home, cast all the pictures in a metallic tambo, and set it on fire. A man once forbade me to leave the hotel room. "You can't go." I wondered more than once how lonely you have to feel to become violent. All through the night, he cried, "Why am I not enough?" And I bandaged him up with my body. Afterwards, I let water run over me. All I heard was static until I screamed. I still don't know what hunger is capable of doing. I keep having a dream of waking up naked in my abuelo's Mexican fields. Lightning has struck everything around me. A fire is sprouting. Thank you.
Wow, incredible. Thank you, Sal, for sharing that poem. I would love to, just a brief, to wrap up the reading, a brief synopsis of your work for the 10 members of the audience who have not read it. I'm hoping that all 10 of you have a copy of each and every single. We announced the winners a while ago, so you should have copies. I'm sorry, the finalists. But I would love to hear a little bit about the process of how this book came to be.
Yeah, so really quickly, I'm going to try to do this in a minute. I, again, began with lineage and grief and, why my parents immigrated to the United States. And it's mostly about not only their experiences as former undocumented individuals in the States, but also the grief that they brought with them, which sometimes is very unspoken of, and how that grief kind of, trickles into me. And it's also about identity, my exploration of identity, and more so, all the kind of monsters that we imagine or live around, or even the monsters who become ourselves.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Sal. All right. Our next poet reader is... Who would like to read?
Cass, I'll leave it up to you. If you'd like to go last or go next.
Oh, okay. I'll go next.
All right.
I'll go ahead and do my poem. Okay. This poem is called Via Negativa, which It refers to negative theology in which the only way to say what the divine is to say everything that it is not. So that's the title, Via Negativa. My grief is not the idea of the lover or nature, not the pretty desert poppy running late to its future, not this photo from before I even met her. Look, it's the Mojave and I am thin, wearing sunglasses and a light sweater. I sip pink champagne with my sister next to a rock with the address 10,000 chalked on. That day, my uncle came out of a trailer and wept because we kept getting older. He believed there was gold in the ground there and that he had discovered anti-gravity. He died the same year as my lover. My grief has no gravity, no beating center. It is not alive, not graphite or diamond, not global pandemic or my home's dry palette of sagebrush and fire, the smell of the lemon grove on the hill, burnt umber, Roman lavender, or invasive eucalyptus, its vibrant takeover. My grief is not Rome or empire, though my body knows that weather. North or south of the equator, a specific latitude of any western shore, sea wind in the olive trees. I'm in the Midwest, far from California and the sea, and my grief is not a death or gender transition or the mirrors covered for a week after. We said her bipolar disorder was like another human figure, like a third person living with us, trying to drag her light under. Now everyone talks about her in the third person, in the past tense, as electricity pulses, as water rises to float an urban center, as I float toward the widowed future, as icebergs circulate on the glaciologist's monitor.
Wow. Really powerful. Yeah, same question. You talked a lot about the collection and how it came to be. Talk to us specifically about this poem and the process of writing this poem. Where did it come from?
Oh gosh, this is actually a really strange poem because there was a draft of something that I had before my partner had passed away, and it was more about ecological collapse, which is something that I've studied and something that she was also writing about, and something that we were in dialogue with each other about. And most of the poems were written after she died, but there were a handful that were kind of a radical revision of something that I had beforehand. So as I was writing this book, a lot of other griefs came into it, and especially grief about climate change and climate catastrophe. And so that came into it, and then it just became a poem about grieving and about trying to name something by unnaming it. And then the other thing is that I think it kind of found its own rhythm, and it found a particular sound that it was attracted back to again and again when I was revising, which is the R sound that a lot of the lines end with. But yeah, thank you.
I love that. Thank you. All right, Tanya.
So I want to say about the book before I read. I was really interested in writing Born Backwards. I was interested in writing a book that would do the same thing that a lot of books had done for me growing up, which was to help me sort of learn how to navigate a world that, did not see queerness as a norm and that saw it as illegal in many ways. And so for me, books were a way that I learned a lot about how to navigate that and find a real contentness with myself, and that kind of overrode that voice that told you you were wrong or doing something incorrectly. And so I wanted to write a book that was part of that lineage. And so I'm going to read what I like to call there's a title poem for this book, but this is the poem that I like to call the cover poem of this book. And in this poem, it mentions Eloise, and that refers to when I went to the Lambda workshop. Eloise Klein-Healy was our poetry workshop leader. And it was a time before I had a book, and I was really frustrated with trying to navigate the world of poetry. And Eloise, both as a person, but also as a writer and with her own work, really helped me find my way through. So the Eloise in this poem is for Eloise Klein-Healy. The poem is called Poet is Pig. Poet is pig born in a barn. Pig pregnant 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. Day 4, come a pig. Most pig born tucking their hooves slide out head first. Special pig born backwards. Poem arrive any which way. Poet push pen on paper. Push, push, come a poem. Make the poem, you a poet. Pretty poem, pretty pig. Squeal pig, waller pig. Piggy having roast beef, piggy having none. Creep, feed, wean, pig, farrow, barn to nursery. Farm life, the soft life, straight shot from born to die. No sunburn danger, no coyote harm. Heat, lamp, vent, fan, farmer play the oldies station all summer long. Why pig love a line dance like poet love a line dance. Pig don't sweat like poet don't sweat. Time release trough, feed 1 pen at a time. Stand there, wait your turn. Lazy pig, porky pig, eat in order the only thing poet or pig willing to fight about. Pig walk itself to finishing barn. Corn, soybean, vitamin, mineral. 16 weeks later, big P pig. Don't every pig make it? Lady pig, lesbian pig, pig of a certain age. Eloise told me, you can knock and knock at poetry's front door, but you will never get in that way. Eloise told me, the lesbian poet dies and they gather to anoint another. It is never going to be someone like you. It will never be a woman like me. Don't everyone end up some big P poet? Pigs stay on the farm, get shot, stuck, scalded, gutted. Pig man use every scrap of pig there is, the rooter to the tutor, my mother liked to say, and they even try to save the squeal. Pig man pile up all the heads, make what he called cheese. In it you can see the shadow of little pig ears. In it you can see their little snouts. Pig in the wild called boar, hair wear to tough like steel, teeth grow out to tusk, tusk made good to dig, tusk made good for gash. Out here we eat what we want, out here we find what we eat, out here we write as we will, out here we gather every night and sing. I ain't young nor pretty, no twinkle in my eye. If I don't work, I'll starve to death, root, hog, or die. Thank you.
Wow, incredible, incredible. Thank you for reading, Tanya, and for prefacing that with the process of working on your book. I think we are running out of time, so I want to thank you all for the incredible readings, but open the floor for questions for our audience. If you have a question, feel free to leave it in the chat, and our amazing poets will answer.
I loved hearing both of your poems so much. Thank you for reading.
Thank you both, yes.
All right, no questions from the audience. Any questions for each other's work that you have so far? Anything that stood out to you about the reading?
Just filled with gratitude. So thank you all for the space and for sharing your perspectives and your work with us today.
Yeah, I would echo that. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to get to hear you talk about your work and thinking.
Yeah, same. Thank you very much, and thanks, Hassan.
Yes, yeah.
My pleasure. I was a judge for multiple awards, but I always come back to Lambda. Try to be part of this incredible community as much as I can. We are running out of time, so give us a little bit hint on what you're working on next before we sign off. Maybe a little bit teaser on what to expect from you following this incredible achievement. Anything to plug?
We wrote books that got nominated for a Lambda. Why is that not enough?
It's an incredible achievement. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely incredible. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on new poems for a book that right now kind of has a working title of Great Dismal. I don't know. I don't know if that'll still be the title soon.
Amazing.
I'm still figuring it out. Multiple projects, some kind of hybrid prose memoir stuff in the works, and new poems, kind of slowly trying to figure out what a next manuscript might look like. But I'm kind of thinking toward queer ecologies and embodiment, and how that's connected to the political landscape that we're seeing today, and how we can heal through embodied relationships with more than human forms and lives.
Amazing.
Go ahead,
Saul.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. I am working on my second manuscript for poetry, and it's still in conversation with grief, but also in conversation with the pastoral of Mexico and the US. And I'm also working on a memoir and a fiction book. Yeah.
Amazing. Busy, talented poets. Thank you so much for being here. We had an incredible informative discussion for our 10 members of the audience. Thank you for being here. And we are going to move to the next panel, and we'll see you all at the ceremony in an hour or two. Yes. All right. Round of applause, invisible audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Hassan.
Thank you.